Okay, here's the second part of the introduction lecture for Introduction to Psychology. Now, the last slide you saw was this one, so we're moving ahead to a very, very important definition. You definitely want to write this down. This is a definition we will visit and revisit. You will be accountable for this definition probably throughout the entire semester. Mental health disorders. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about mental health disorders, what they are not. It's easy to look at someone and make a snap judgment and assume that they have a problem or a mental health disorder when they may or may not. We're talking about disturbances of an individual's behavioral or psychological functioning that are not culturally expected and that lead to psychological distress, behavioral disability, and or impaired overall functioning. Now let's dissect this a little bit. You're writing this down, you want this in your notes, by the way. So, a disturbance of a person's behavioral or psychological functioning. Let's just start with that part. Now we all have little weird, strange quirks, right? I have mine, you probably have yours. Does that mean that you have a mental health disorder? Not necessarily. Now, if these disturbances in your behavior or your psychological functioning start to impair your ability to function, if they keep you from having relationships, if they keep you from coming to school, if they lead to substance abuse, if they lead to other dangerous behaviors that impair your overall functioning, then we start to look at this stuff as maybe a mental health disorder. Maybe some of you are neat freaks. You like to have things a very specific and certain way. That's fine. Does that get in the way of your functioning? Does it keep you from coming to school? If the answer is no, then you don't have a disorder. If someone is so obsessive compulsive and they're so obsessed with order and cleanliness that they're having to take 4 and 5 showers before they leave the house, which keeps them from getting to work on time, then we might be having something that we're looking at as a disorder. So, and the overall bottom line for me is this one. Is it impairing overall functioning? If it is, then it may be a disorder, and then we look at it a little more closely. Now we're going to talk about different disorders as we go. Some of the more common ones and some of the ones that we'll discuss in this class include anxiety, schizophrenia, depression, gender identity disorder, autism, mental impairment, obsessive compulsive disorder, and there are many others, but this just gives you an idea of some of the ones we'll talk about. Now, Sigmund Freud started talking about personality. Well, a lot of people even before Freud, but we know a lot about Freud's theory of personality. We all have a personality. That doesn't mean that you have a problem or a disorder. Your personality, very simply, and you're going to want to write this down, are the characteristics or the attributes that make you unique. Your way of thinking, your way of talking, your way of communicating, the clothes that you wear, the foods that you eat, the music you listen to, the way that you carry yourself, yada yada, on and on and on. All of these things taken together comprise your personality. And everybody, while we may have similarities, all of us are different. We're all different in terms of our personalities. Now, sometimes our personalities are formed or forged in such a way that it leads to a personality disorder. And we'll talk about the different types. You don't have to know these yet. These are psychological disorders, and you're going to want to write this down. These are psychological disorders characterized by enduring and inflexible behavior patterns that impair social functioning. Some of the personality disorders that we'll discuss in this class include antisocial personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, delusional disorder. There are lots of different, the narcissistic personality disorder. There are lots of different personality disorders. We'll cover the main ones in this class as we go as well. Now, can psychology explain why groups of people do strange things? We've already mentioned the fact that as individuals we can do some pretty weird things, some strange things. But sometimes groups of people do some really weird things together. Why is this? Is it just culture? Is it somehow a lack of inhibition? If we act, if we're hanging out with a group of people and everybody else is doing something bad or doing something inappropriate, do we feel more safe joining in because there's safety in numbers? Can psychology explain this kind of stuff? Well, not to turn this into a sociology lecture, because we've already done sociology if you had me last semester, but culture is a big component, a key component in trying to understand whether or not a mental health disorder exists. We can look at people from different parts of the world who do things that they think are normal, and we think, yeah, why would anybody do that? Why would someone, when I traveled to England, for example, I was in an international airport, and I noticed that the majority of European men, instead of greeting each other with a fist pump or a handshake, which is what we kind of do in this culture, would greet each other with a kiss, either on the cheek or maybe right on the side of the lip. And grown men. And we might look at this and think, okay, this is weird. We don't do this in our culture. However, in parts of Europe, it's been done that way. That's been the normal greeting pattern for a long time, and it's not seen as being strange at all. So a lot of it is cultural. I'm going to skip through some of these, so don't worry about this. Those were things that I use actually in class. I'm going to send you some video links to some of that stuff I zipped through, so you can kind of see things that different people do from different parts of the world. So we'll come back and we'll talk about that. Now, I would ask this question: does this gentleman on the left have a mental health disorder? And the answer is, well, no, not based on this, his appearance anyway. He has a physiological or a physical disorder, but this doesn't mean that he has a mental health disorder. Now, it could lead to anxiety or depression because of the way he looks. The woman on the right, she's smoking the biggest, is that a joint? I don't know what you would call that I've ever seen in my life. Does this mean that she has a mental health disorder? Well, again, not necessarily. Could be, though. There's an entire classification system set aside to diagnose people with substance abuse and dependence disorders. These count as mental health disorders, as psychological disorders, and we can talk about those as we go. So is it possible that this woman suffers from a substance abuse related disorder? It's possible, but then again, maybe she's just doing this for the first time. Maybe she's doing it for attention. Maybe it's just a one and done kind of thing. So that wouldn't necessarily mean that it's a mental health problem. It may be inappropriate or even illegal, but not necessarily a mental health or a substance abuse problem. And we'll call that the end of this part. Thank you.